linguistic objects, help machines.
Greetings from Cyberdelic Space. This is Lorenzo, and I'm your host here in the Psychedelic Salon. So, how are you today? All ready for another installment of the trialogue between Terence McKenna, Ralph Abraham, and Rupert Sheldrake? As you probably know already, we're getting down to the end of the first series of conversations the three of them held at Esalen Institute in 1989 and 1990. And since we're going to hear the first side of the 9th tape in the series of 10, my guess is that this particular talk was recorded in 1990, although the cassette tapes weren't clearly labeled as to what year they were made, so we can't really be sure. But I hope you don't let the title of this tape throw you off. If you read the program notes, you know that they titled it Education in the New World Order. And apparently, when they held this conversation, the phrase New World Order didn't have the negative connotation that does today, at least for some people. But as I understand it from their conversation, they used the term only to project their thinking into a utopian future that didn't include the existing world order, which I think we can all agree is in some need of improving. Anyway, I think you're going to enjoy this particular talk. I know it gave me some new ideas about what's been going on with our current educational system, at least here in the States, and I think they came up with some workable suggestions for making changes in it. At least their ideas in this talk seem a little more practical than some of the more far-out plans that they've come up with in the past. So let's join our merry trialoguers as they ponder what to do about the sad state of government-sponsored education.
Education in the New World Order. Everybody agrees there's something wrong with the educational system that we have today. I mean, even mainstream official educationists are worried about it. There's something about it which doesn't seem to be working. And obviously, in the New World Order, there'll be an educational system of some kind. Every society or civilization has one. So one has to think, what kind do we actually want? And we know that the present kind needs replacing in some way. So what kind do we actually want? And what, if we take a walk through it, what would it look like? The educational system in the New World Order. Well, I think that the first thing about it would be that education would recognize that it is in fact a form of initiation, that its entire archetypal role is that of an initiation process. The education, in fact, the present educational system mimics the initiatory process, indeed is a kind of initiatory process, where you go through the different exams. Like every initiator, you have a training, you pass through a time of testing or trial, and some fail, others pass, and the pass ones are the initiates. And so at every level you have 11-year-olds, sort of 15-year high school graduations, college exams, Bachelor of Arts, Master of Arts, Doctor of Philosophy, and these higher and higher degrees and qualifications, each of which involves its test of initiation, each of which, once initiated into that hierarchy in the academic grade within the academic hierarchy, people have a kind of official certification of higher and higher levels of education, recognized throughout our whole modern society, which pays great respect to things like academic qualifications. You'll better job, you'll get better jobs, better employment opportunities, more respect. And that's, of course, why everyone wants these degrees, and why, to the despair of educators throughout the world, most college students passing through the universities seem to have so little real interest in the subjects they're studying. They want to, in the third world, it's very clear, they just want the degree, because with a BA or an MA, your entire social status has changed in India. And your marriage prospects, the size of diary you can command, and so on. It's a quantifiable sliding scale of status. Anyway, this is the present educational system we have, and the present educational system is based on an initiatory model. And in fact, I think it is an initiation into a model. It's an initiation into what one could think of as the rationalist or humanist worldview, or mind set, frame of mind, way of thinking. And So one of the things that it does all along is to mean that the mind or the intellect is the predominant, godlike point of view from which everything is seen. So when you teach school children literature within this framework of this system that we've got now, this mechanistic, humanist, rationalist model, you don't just read them the great poems by sort of beating a drum and bringing the magic of the poem and going into the myth. You say this poem was written in 1635 by so-and-so, who was born in so-and-so, and you then learn all these facts about the poets, which you have dates of when they were born and died and that kind of thing, which you have to be able to know for exams. And then certain stock ways of analysing Shakespeare's plays, for example, for school exams, where such and such a character does this role, and here Shakespeare was borrowing from this tradition and putting this, and taking the whole thing to pieces by this kind of detached analytical mind. The same in the fine arts. As soon as this mind gets onto the arts, you've got the same thing. You know, this was painted by so-and-so in the school of so-and-so, bought by so-and-so in such and such a collection, and so on. So I think that all these ways of distancing and the self and bringing the rational academic trained mind as being the supreme point of view is the initiation into which this educational system works. It makes that the supreme arbiter, a kind of human reason. And so it's this kind of rationalistic humanism. So it is an initiation right now. The present educational system is an initiatory system. One has to recognize that, and each of its levels, like commencement, graduation day from high school and so on, are attended by impressive public ceremonies which, in the classic tradition of public initiation and recognition to a higher grade or status, look like a medieval guild or craft. It's one of the few realms in which that kind of world lives on, with these hierarchical gradations, with robes and all the apparatus in the realm of science, of a scientific priesthood, in fact. And indeed it is the scientific priesthood envisaged by Bacon in the scientific world, the academic model and the priestly role of the higher initiates in running and ordering society, the more educated. So we do have that kind of system, but in order to replace it, we obviously have to have not only just tinkering with the present system, which is entirely dedicated to that view of the world, and when it extends its baleful influence over the third world countries, as I've seen it do in Indian villages, as soon as the school comes in, and the secondary school, these kids that go through that, they become alienated from tradition. They want to wear pants instead of dhotis. They want to work in cities instead of stay in the village. They want to have an office job sort of with sitting behind a desk and being a kind of bureaucrat rather than getting their hands dirty. All these classical archetypes of kind of Indian bourgeois aspiration take over, and they're alienated from the village culture in which they were educated. Most of them drop off and go to the cities, and the villages they distill off, fortunately, for village life. But you can see this whole new frame of mind being introduced in the entire third world through UNESCO and through educational things. The first step is literacy. You've got to have them reading and writing, because then you can get across that what's in books is more important than what you actually feel or experience. Because the world of books, huge libraries and stuff, scientific journals, is vastly larger than anything any one of us could ever read, comprehend, or experience. So there's this overwhelming weight of fact which one can't but be in awe of and respect. And as soon as the more one's initiated into that world and the priesthood of the world of books and of the written word, then the more one's mind is bound up in that whole realm, and the more one's being's assimilated to it. And the less the realm of ordinary experience counts for anything. In fact, it still counts, but it counts behind the diaphragm that separates from the educated public persona from the private domestic or romantic solitude or hiking in the wilderness weekend persona or holiday in Bali persona. These other wilder, freer aspects of the personality are relegated to free time, not in the educated part. So the alternative educational model would still be based on initiations, but it would be based on going with the grain of initiation, which is throughout the world what most people want to be initiated into a lot of things. And they realize that being initiated into them means taking on a new social role, a new social pattern. And usually these roles are in some sense sacralized, guilds of craftsmen, etc., with their patron saints. And Indian castes, each with their own traditions, the potter caste, the weaver caste, and so on, with traditions and skills which are passed on with them. And the children with them want to be initiated into being a potter or a weaver, if you're in that. There's a respect and accord given to the initiates, which the young aspire to. And you get exactly the same thing in our own society with driving. I mean, most adult people don't want to be the kind of people who either can't drive or haven't qualified for a driving license. And they have to go through a learning period and they have to pass the test. And once they've passed it, they join the club of qualified drivers. Most kids actually want to be initiated into that. There's a real power, a kind of magnetic pull about being along. There's a glamour to it which they want. And a whole new freedom and a true initiation takes place. And these are very deep, and people want to be initiated into swimming, into sex, into drugs of various kinds, into games, into skills and professions. These are basic desires for initiation. So the model of education would be this initiation-based education, of which the present educational system has many of the elements, but in a kind of parody version, because these tests only operate in the written mode, they only operate in the language mode. All examinations involve sitting at a desk with a pen and writing, that they entirely work through this written mode, and they're initiations into the written world, as it were. So there are other kinds of initiations, and if you think about it, a lot of the present educational system could be transformed by recognizing its initiatory quality. Like medical students, to become doctors, have to dissect a complete human corpse. This is an absolute requirement. And every medical student, when they first come into the dissecting room, undergoes an instinctive, deep-down revulsion from this room full of partially dismembered corpses, something against which all societies have had taboos, on the respect for the corpse and that sort of thing, the power of a corpse. And to overcome all these traditional taboos, they have to adopt a highly detached and usually jocular attitude, with dissecting rooms full of people playing hockey with, as they did in the Cambridge ones, with severed legs, using testicles as the hockey balls, this kind of thing. A typical medical student hijinks in the dissecting room, where this kind of jocularity is forced as a response. Say, instead of that, to become a doctor you have to dissect a dead human body. And to do that, you have to have a meditation on death first. You maybe have to, like in a Tibetan meditation, spend a night in a graveyard and, really confront what one's doing, that the initiatory quality of being in it, confronting death in some kind of way. This is a solemn moment. And in most other trades, professions, skills, etc., there would be this initiatory way of doing it, which exists to some extent in voluntary organizations and clubs and hobbyists of every kind, who want to have their people pursue things because they're really interested. There'd also be adolescent initiation rites somewhere in this. We mentioned that at Hollyhock, Jill and I were talking about vision camps, summer camps, where kids go and where there's a truly initiatory program now, involving a vision quest, for example, at least 24 hours away, alone in the wilderness. These camps already exist in northern Vancouver Island in the summer, mostly for Indian youths. And so there'd be this initiatory quality introduced throughout the educational system, and computer modeling, for example, would be a very important part of the initiatory thing into mathematics, which would be an initiation into the mathematical landscape, which is the hidden mystery of mathematics, into which most students of it never get an inkling. They don't even know it's there, because mathematicians don't talk about it. They pretend that it's this rational system of numbers and symbols. But actually, the really good ones have these vivid visual imaginations, which is where it all happens, where the magic goes on. Well, now, one of your great points is this can now be rendered visible through computer models. You can enter into it as you can through fractal programs and that kind of thing, and actually explore the mathematical landscape in the privacy of your home from moderately priced diskette available from Ariel Press. And so this obviously is part of it too. So, and also within each branch of learning, there would be, through ceremony, you'd learn about how to mend cars, you'd learn from plumbers about the elements of plumbing, you'd learn useful things in schools, and to be initiated by members of recognized trades or professions, like a plumber would teach you plumbing, a real plumber, who's really part of the kind of plumbers union, the really initiated plumber world. And so you'd see that you'd have an entry into these different worlds through these initiations, which could take place within the framework of ordinary schools. And through acknowledging the tradition, which is in each of these cases a way of life, a whole cultural tradition, not just a piece of book learning or things written on paper, you come into the larger group dynamics, the social psyche, the education would be integrated into the larger emotional and intuitive and social bonding aspects of one's life. Anyway, one kind of educational system that has this initiatory quality to some extent is the workshop system, and this is the principal alternative educational system that has developed outside the orthodox one. And it's obviously the best model for actually replacing the present one. A vast extension of the workshop system of education, because workshop-type education involves people interacting as a group, and it's impossible to forget the group dynamics. It's not just a teacher in a classroom who are meant to be quiet, although in fact what's going on is group dynamics of often turbulent kind. The workshop makes the group dynamics explicit, and is the model of people who actually want to learn something together, to make some new insight, to make some new step or experience or transition, which, at the end of which, Friday noon, they'll have actually been through a kind of group initiatory experience, which has involved a group bonding, a new shared way of seeing the world, a new consensus reality emerging, a new insight into self-transformation, etc. Initiatory hopes, anyway. The other thing is that, the other final point is that for the educational system to be transformed, each branch of it, each profession of it that already exists as a kind of guild, like mathematicians have their own kind of guild, and biochemists, and these are guilds with their founding fathers, their honoured traditions, etc. They're like guilds. Each one of them has to, from within itself, within the group, have a new vision of what it could be, like revisioning psychology, like Hillman's book. There's the revisioning model, revisioning medicine. What would happen if a group of doctors got together, led in a workshop-type format at somewhere like Esalen, and did things like shamanic chanting in a workshop format, and then also discussed what was their original vision in becoming a doctor, what was going right back to contact the original inspiration for each of them, and then tell it to other people. What did you see medicine could be? What's your experience of it as you've actually come into it? Limitations and so on. And what could a new vision of medicine be? A new kind of healing profession. This kind of revisioning could occur within each of the, what could a real botany be within the botanical? A real botany would be a science really related to the spirits of the plant world, as well with an understanding of their forms, names, colours, embryologies and so on, but essentially knowing in the greatest detail and relating to the spirits of the vegetative kingdom. So this would be what the new professions would be like, and they could be transformed, I think, by a whole transformation of consciousness that could come about in a group format within members of the profession, a whole new vision of what it could be. So, in summary, I think that in the New World Order, the educational model would be an education through initiation. The initiations will be things that people on the whole want to do and involve far more than just writing things down, but actually a real mental, physical and social competence to do whatever it is that needs to be done, which is what involved in real guild initiations, apprenticeships and so on. And that the workshop mode is probably the best model for what the new educational models would be like. And the professional groups that already exist to transform these traditions from within, which has to be done to maintain their organic integrity as a profession. I mean, and hence the source of ancient traditions, which can actually have a mythic power and therefore help to transform. All this might happen in a new millennium and lead us into a new psychedelic world order.
Well, it's very interesting. I agree. I think you put your finger on it, that this initiatory thing is the continuing thread from the archaic that could lead into the future, and that means there's reason for hope. The only thing I would really add to that is that when I imagine the educational system of the future, I think that part of our problem and how we reached this historical impasse was through accepting a kind of historical amnesia, and that the education of the future should have a tremendous focus on history. The educational system currently in place I take to have as its sort of paradigm the teaching of physics. In other words, the conveying of an extremely abstract, mathematically based description of nature that ushers into high engineering competence. And I would imagine in an ideal educational milieu in the future that perhaps the science of archaeology might replace the science of physics as the place where focus was to go. Most people are not aware of the revolution in information recovery ability that has occurred in archaeology in the last even 10 years. So that in a sense, a kind of telescope into the past is being erected by the world archaeological community. And teaching this is a way of re-anchoring ourselves from the post-industrial notion of history as a kind of trendless fluctuation or a class struggle or some of these other very disensouled models of what the human journey through time is. So I think we have fallen into a kind of historical amnesia. This has blunted the acuity of our political decision making, and that part of reforming education has to be to teach people that history is a system of interlocking resonances in which they are embedded, and they are going to be called upon to make decisions which will affect the state of life on this planet millennia in the future. So without a complete knowledge of history that is seamless from the birth of the universe down to yesterday's headline, we're not in a position to act toward our best interests. And I take education broadly to be the inculcation of attitudes that cause us to act generally in the interest of all. That's about it. I think your other very strong point is the power of the feudal guild model, and that this goes hand in hand with the McLuhanist expectation of what he called an electronic feudalizing of society, that this hierarchy of academic cant that has been built up is in fact a sham, a thing of squeaking gears and creaking pulleys that is left over from another age, and that we should just understand that education is a kind of value-neutral medium, and that whether you learn the Tao of waste disposal or the Tao of 16th century Spanish literature, you are essentially tilling the same field, and that people have lost the sense of the how-ness of their professionalism, and the educational system has been contaminated by concepts of class struggle, class difference, this sort of thing. Ralph, what's your take on that?
Well, I like these visions, revisions, as far as they go. I think the initiation mode is a good one in that it has a traditional track record, successful track record. It engages the motivation of children to try to proceed from the green belt to the brown belt and so on. And it also is, as you correctly pointed out, Rupert, is the system that we have in today's educational factory. So I think that this is excellent as far as it goes, and I like the workshop mode, and I think I agree, Terence, it would be valuable to infuse the curriculum with new dimensions of history, archaeology, and the revision of the past. And the revision of the past must be re-revised annually. And this mode would make that possible, because I presume in the workshop model you have in mind asking a different plumber every year, asking a different archaeologist. It would not be a professor with tenure.
Oh no, the ones that are actually professional plumbers that would come in there.
Yes. But still, I think that this somehow doesn't go far enough. I feel uneasy in that maybe the main problems in the current system haven't really been engaged yet. And the trouble is we don't know exactly what they are. And no, I think this view is kind of focusing on higher education, and maybe that's good, because lower education will always be on the way to higher education, and when higher education is transformed, it will somehow change the whole system. And myself, I took a shortcut in school and left in the 9th grade and never returned. And then I entered early in university, and I'm now starting my 40th year, so I can not really suggest a revision of the elementary school system.
Well, the invocation of feminism and feminine values, or some kind of way of feminizing the whole system in those early grades,
yes,
that's probably the most
like
important.
Infusing the current system with a new spirit, I think somehow won't do it. And among the rash of books criticizing the higher educational system this year, there's one, Page Smith's The Death of the Spirit, which he's a historian, America's premier historian, and he spent half his book complaining about the current system and the other half discussing how it got that way. And I was pleased to discover that the higher educational system of Europe and America is not getting worse and worse. It was always this bad. We can take fault even if we go to the first one, which is when Ptolemy gave this huge endowment to the Alexandrian Museum. Here we had professors with lifetime tenure, and his responsibility was to give one lecture per week or to contribute a poem or amusement for public display.
Sounds like a good job.
So Page Smith takes issue, first of all, with the tenure system. Now, I like the tenure system. I would be out on my ear years ago if I didn't have this very, very strong job security. But somehow it's part of the problem, I think. And you have to ask, in your vision of the new educational system in the new world order, where the workshops, who is organizing this? Where is the Department of Administration, the administration building? Who's deciding which workshops will be offered, which plumber will be, and so on? Will there be new emphasis on feminist revision of history? Will there be new results from archaeology or not? Somebody, after all, is deciding, whether it's the PTA or whatever. How many people are going to school? All, a few, those who wish. Rewards will be offered, yes or no. I mean, these things have to do with nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts of running a school system. And as the system evolves or devolves would be more honest, since we don't expect it to get better and better in the course of time. Somehow the paths of its devolution the seeds would be contained in this administrative system put in place in the beginning. Who is in charge? The students participate in decisions and so on. Then, even with the initiation model, I find some anxiety in thinking about this, because we have in the current initiation system, there are two different roles in the initiation that in the beginning of your introduction you alluded. One is initiation, as with the corpse. And the other is valuation, the accreditation, a guarantee to the world that this doctor has reached a certain level of skill and is therefore accredited, authorized to dispense antibiotic medicines by prescription. That means that in the initiation there has to be a test. And in the test, usually verbal, as you said, although when I was an engineering student, we had to pass the welding course. The test was given by a tensile test machine.
Oh, in the sciences, practical as well, of course.
Yes. So I, as a teacher, always hated this testing aspect and claimed other people should do it. I'm only willing to teach people who want to learn from me. That is my only role that I accept. But nevertheless, I must write letters of recommendation. Students who have been friends, who have respected me, who now beg me to assist them by writing a letter of recommendation. I must say that this student reached a certain level. I don't even know what level the student reached. And whatever I thought it was, I'm not sure. And even if I was sure, I wouldn't know how to say it in a sentence. I hate this role. And I hate grading tests and trying to figure out where to place the lines between the grades A, B, C, or whatever. So the testing aspect and the initiatory aspect must not necessarily to be combined into a single tool, function, or whatever.
No.
And so I like the initiation, I don't like the testing, and yet if you don't have the testing, then the educational system is somehow failing its mission to society in doing one of the things that society asks it to do, which is to produce tradesmen. You see, I don't accept plumbing in the educational curriculum. Everybody should learn computer programming and other kinds of plumbing, of course. But I think the heart of the curriculum, the school system, should somehow transcend the trades and the apprenticeship for a profession and the learning of basic skills, walk, run, jump, eat a complete diet, and so on. Where is spiritual value? Where is moral and ethical value? Where is the fabric of society, as it were? Where is that taught? If not in the school, then embedded in soap operas or where? Somehow the curriculum has to have a spiritual, moral, social values, which could fit in the workshop mode, which could be consistent with the initiatory, but have nothing to do with the trade school and the trade union. More, there would be maybe some spiritual elite, some professors of moral philosophy. We would have Plato and Socrates would be leading a workshop, something like that. Then I could see that it fits in this mode. But somehow, whoever is arranging the workshop in plumbing and who's arranging the workshop in spiritual value, these must be, I guess, differently qualified people. Finally, I think this, another thing that has crippled the modern university is the isolation of the specialties. And I don't see in this new vision a way of dealing with that. I think that besides the workshop with one leader, we must have workshops with trialogue leaders so that the interplay of the different specialties could be given due time, in fact, equal time with specialties. I don't propose, as many people do, to replace courses in specialties completely with interdisciplinary courses. I think it's kind of a partnership, Mother Earth, Father Sky, that there will be specialties and equal time for syncretists to put it together and obtain some meaning from 3 or 4 specialties, and to free associate upon all of this, relating whatever is the subject matter of a workshop, of the entire educational experience, to the progress, the future of society, and the evolutionary challenges presented to each generation. Well, these are just some other problems I think not addressed by your suggestions so far, and that somehow these have to be not addressed individually, but taken into account somehow in the overall design of the educational system for a new world order. It needs the participation of the community in the selection of the curriculum. It needs a certain rigidity that resists evolution that's too fast. It needs the partnership of the the special and the general. It needs the relationship to life, not only in terms of fixing the faucets, but also in making moral decisions in every day about how to relate to altruism and selfishness and synergy. And I have no idea how to do this, how to change the system. I just think that what you've suggested is the beginning of an evolutionary track, very similar to the one that we're now on, and in the course of just a few years or generations would result in the same mess that we now have. We need a new idea.
Well, I mean, what's obviously the element lacking from what I talked about and which you draw attention to is largely the kind of spiritual dimension, because I was talking about a reformed secular educational system, taking for granted the fact that the present educational system is secular. Now, if one can think of a spiritually based educational system, then it's in a completely different realm of possibilities. The problem, however, is that if it were Christian based, then all the Jews, Muslims, Hindus and atheists would object. If it were Jewish, all the rest, and if it were Hindu, then fundamentalist Christian parents would object. What's stymied, one of the terrible impasses of the modern educational system is because of secular pluralism, and because the importance secular pluralism has for the modern political ideology, which is this kind of humanist, capitalist, free market idea. I mean, it's a very important feature. It means that no one spiritual traditional practice can be used in schools. I mean, except in explicitly Roman Catholic schools or Jewish schools or Muslim schools, which is why a lot of people want separate Roman Catholic, Jewish, Muslim schools, exactly because they do think this is important. But in the secular system, you can't do it. So there's a terrible blockage there. And the only way to overcome this problem would be to have a new official world order, which could empower, accredit, etc., which is not the state, because the secular state, by its very nature, is desacralized. It's a humanist concept.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is that this revolution would have to go a long way if you want the entire package deal.
A long way. We want to go a long way. It would require
some kind of new religious consensus into which people could be initiated. Now, I think that's perhaps hoping for too much. And my more moderate suggestion would be, firstly, that each initiation has to involve a real experience at different levels of reality. So like archaeology, you wouldn't just study in books and see slides and videos of these things. You'd have to go to certain sacred places and maybe spend the night there alone, if it was that kind, or the day there, or whatever, so that you actually came to know the spirits of these places that you've been talking about, the kinds of places. You knew it directly from real experience. And you'd also do this kind of thing. If it had this vision quest element, you'd have a group initiation quality to it as well, and there'd be the sense of initiation into social groups and the honor of groups and so on, which would be a series of self-regulating societies, which would be models. Then, if for the entire society to have a system of regulation, you need to have official state rights, like they do in Japan through the Shinto religion and the emperor, and as we do in Britain through the monarchy, and still acknowledged official state rights, like the royal opening of Parliament, praying for the Queen, and that kind of thing. But most countries don't have the possibility of transforming that system. In Britain we do, and I think the problem is quite different here in America, because there isn't. American politics is based on a different model, a desacralized model.
Yes.
So the alternative is the American way would be to have a free-for-all. And how it would work is this. Each student at age 17 would be given a book of 55 workshop vouchers, and they'd be told that to become an initiated adult, they'd have to take 55 workshops over the next 3 years, or maybe 40 workshops or whatever, and there'd have to be 5 in the kind of group dynamics, social myths, history, understanding our society, and the kind of social ethic as well as direct group experience. Some would be in philosophy, others in natural history and knowing about the natural world, etc. So you'd have some stipulation on the minimum number in each. And then there's a computerized, centralized Esselin, Hollyhock, etc. catalogue, far many more workshop centres would spring up all over, based on modified summer camps, etc. And or modified schools, existing schools. And you'd have local patterns of workshops, and you'd have also ones to which people travel and stay. And
I mean that the student's credential on finishing the use of the 55 vouchers would be the list of workshops that had been completed to the point of initiation.
Then it would be, the whole process would be started by some initiatory thing into this pathway. Each workshop would itself have an initiatory pattern. And the whole thing would culminate in some final test, which would be the borderline from the student having passed a test not only involving intellectual skills, but also skills in groups, also some kind of social sense or responsibility, as actually done through groups and workshop learning, making group dynamics conscious and so on. And then there'd be some final test that involved all these, and it would be like one of these, and I think it could probably also involve, like the Eleusinian mysteries, a psychedelic revelation. I think this would be probably the best way to have the graduation thing. You'd have to have this psychedelic initiation thing. Now, maybe mushrooms would be the best thing.
Oh, absolutely. The archaic return, the culmination of the educational process in the archaic mystery, which is where it always ended.
Well, besides the fact that you address my complaint about the lack of the sacred with actually an interesting covert plan for the introduction of a new world religion through these religious aspect of the initiations and the visits to the sacred sites. There's also the possibility, since there's no school in this plan, there are workshop centers all over the place, that ordinary courses of religion, ethics, and so on, according to different traditions, would also be offering workshops, and students, according to their choice of ancient tradition, could take a Neo-pagan, Neo-Platonic, and Neo-Pythagorean, and
Roman
so on.
Catholic, Methodist,
Yes.
Islamic, Hindu. There'd be workshops in these and Tibetan Buddhist, led by people in those traditions. If you want to know about Judaism, you don't go to a religious education instructor who tells you about it from a book. You go to do a workshop with a rabbi.
Yes. And then the relationship between education and the job market would be imagined then through some classified ads that a person wanted must have 3 W courses, 2 E courses, and 1 S, or something like that.
Right.
And then as these requirements of different industries became known, people seeking a certain profession would see to it that they learned how to read, for example, or how to run a computer.
Well, that would be one way it would work, yes, and I think that this educational system probably would fulfill the needs of industry, although I hadn't thought of that way, better than the present one, because it would actually give a much better sense of the industry. They're not interested in taking graduates who just think from books. They complain all the time in Britain about how they don't want university graduates in a lot of British industry, because their heads are too big, and they're too big for their boots, and they don't respect practical experience, so they'd rather take people straight from school. Common pattern.
Well, English universities were started by the church, but American universities, as Page Smith points out in his book, were started by tycoons of business. And each successful tycoon had to have among his credentials a university he'd started with an endowment. So, besides, I think the vision, this is a good one, is becoming for me personally more and more satisfactory and also plausible. I think that some people have suggested, actually, that the public school system be replaced with a voucher system.
This is
an active proposal at the moment.
This is a Thatcherite idea, too. The point is, this voucher system is part of the current political orthodoxy, so it's very easy to see how it might be realized in a new form.
Yeah, well, that's, I think, a question we have to face is besides the envision of the final product, also some idea as to the path that goes from here, point A, to there, point B. And it's hard to see how to get rid of this entrenched public school system. It would have to be, as we're talking about politics here, there would have to be a plebiscite where the voters insist on the opportunity to control the school system, and that they want a voucher system.
You simply privatize it. And you privatize the education. You have a voucher system valid at any school, a well-known approved list, which is constituted by a new kind of educational board, not the old one. And the approved list includes Waldorf schools, Montessori schools. It would include Catholic schools, Islamic schools. I mean, there'd be a whole range of accredited schools, including former public schools, which would now become sort of autonomous town schools or something. They'd compete in the open market. And this system would be it'd be pluralistic. It would be extremely responsive to what people actually want and what parents and students are really interested in. And it would have the advantage of being very decentralized and self-regulating.
Well, they had me there for a while, but I have to admit that Rupert lost me at the end there when he started promoting a voucher system for public schools. Maybe we'll hear Terence and Ralph's response to that in the second half of this trialogue, which will be our next podcast. But unfortunately, that won't be until next week. I know, you were getting used to me putting out 3 podcasts a week there for a while, and you were really kind to give me a pass when I cut it back to only 2 a week. So it really does bother me that I'm going to have to cut back to just 1 podcast a week for a while here, but I've got a really good reason this time. At least I think so. You see, I'm leaving for the East Coast tomorrow so that I can be with my children and grandchildren to help celebrate my oldest granddaughter's 8th birthday. So you see, I really do have a good excuse this time, and I promise to get the second half of this tape out as soon as I get back next week. But that means it'll probably be late Wednesday or sometimes Thursday before I get it out to you, and hey, I really appreciate your understanding. I don't know about you, but I do like the idea about a workshop-based system to replace our current Western system of indoctrinating our children into the fabric of society before they have the opportunity to make an informed choice on their own about just where they want to fit in. I know that if I had an education that taught me how to think instead of what to think, I'm sure my life choices would have been significantly different than they were when I was still thinking the way I was brainwashed into thinking by the culture that I was born into. It seems to me that the way we educate those who come after us actually changes the world more than any of us can do on our own. So this is really a vitally important issue, at least in my humble opinion. And another thing they got me thinking about was when Ralph was talking about the workshop model for an education system, the one that Rupert and Terence had proposed. And his primary question, as I understood it, was, so who would decide which workshops would be given, and so on. Basically, his question seemed to be who would administer this new system. And I wonder how Ralph would frame this question now that the Internet has evolved to its current point, which, of course, is still only a small glimmer of what it's going to be in 10 years. The amazing variety of courses and workshops that are offered right now already boggle the mind, so I guess the question goes from who will decide what is offered to one of how does one decide which courses and workshops to take. And I guess the Joseph Campbell answer is the one I'd vote for: follow your bliss, which I discovered is often easier to say than to actually do. And I'm sure that many professional teachers would argue that something more structured than the hodgepodge of today's Internet is needed to properly educate somebody. But I'll tell you this, from the thoughtful comments I've been receiving in emails from people who are less than 1/3 of my age, all I can say is that they're sure learning a lot of important things that I don't think you'll find in many school curriculums. I'm just blown away by some of your comments, and my guess is that a lot of what you've learned has come from surfing far and wide on the Internet. I guess that's one reason I'm so hopeful about our long-term future. While the baby boomers are products of television, their children are growing up on the Internet. And wait till we see what their children are going to be like. They'll never know what life was like without a high-speed Internet connection. I wish I could travel into the future and hear what kind of stories my great-grandchildren will tell their children about how hard life was when they were growing up. I remember my mother talking about not having indoor plumbing, and my big hardship was that our television was only in black and white when I was a kid. And my children, of course, can say how hard life was before the internet, and at the rate we're going, it won't be long before children are hearing their parents tell them what life was like before there was a holodeck in every home. Now, I guess I'd better close before I get too carried away here, but there is one more thing I want to mention. And that is, did you get a chance to see the comet McKenna the last few days? I don't think it's visible in the northern hemisphere any longer, but if you happen to live south of the equator, I think you still have a few days to see it. And to be honest, I wasn't all that excited about seeing it at first, but thankfully, my wife encouraged me to join her in watching it while we could, and I have to tell you that it turned into a rather mystical experience for me. To begin with, it was a lot bigger than I remember Halley's Comet to be when it was here a few years ago. And when I looked at it through some binoculars, I was really blown away. It was just huge. And as I looked at it, I tried to imagine what it would sound like if I was riding it into our atmosphere. And when I did that, I was suddenly struck by the fact that had that comet's path been only a tiny bit closer, it actually could have hit the Earth and essentially brought our great human experiment to an end. I know that my words aren't really conveying what I felt at the moment, but seeing that huge fiery object speeding through space and knowing that if it struck the Earth we'd all be done for, well, that just made me intensely aware of how fragile our hold on life on this little planet really is. Why we're spending so much of our time building weapons instead of figuring out ways to divert these large objects that keep coming our way is just beyond me. You know, eventually something as large as that comet is going to be heading right for us, and the sooner we begin working on what to do about that inevitable problem, the better chance we're going to have of solving it before it solves all of our human problems once and for all. So if you're living down under right now, why don't you go out and do some comet watching the next few nights? It really is inspiring. At least it was for me. Well, before I go, once again, I need to mention that this and all of the podcasts from the Psychedelic Salon are protected under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 2.5 license. And if you have any questions about that, just click on the link at the bottom of the Psychedelic Salon webpage, which you can find at matrixmasters.com/podcasts. And if you still have questions, you can send them in an email to lorenzo@matrixmasters.com. Thanks again to Chateau Hayuk for letting us use your music here in the Psychedelic Salon. And for now, this is Lorenzo, signing off from Cyberdelic Space. Be well, my friends.
Linguistic objects, help machines.
Greetings from Cyberdelic Space. This is Lorenzo, and I'm your host here in the Psychedelic Salon. Even though it's only been about 8 days since my last podcast, it seems like it's been a month. I'm sorry about the delay in getting this week's program out to you, but I just returned from a trip to the East Coast to visit my children and grandchildren, and to tell you the truth, it's a little hard to get back into the swing of things, particularly when I logged in after being offline for a week and found several hundred emails waiting for me. But more about that after we hear the rest of the trialogue that we began last week. As you know, I've been podcasting a series of conversations that Terence McKenna, Ralph Abraham, and Rupert Sheldrake held at the Esalen Institute in 1989 and 1990. And today's program is the second half of a tape from that series that was titled Education in the New World Order. And we'll begin where we left off last week when Rupert opened the conversation up to a discussion of a school voucher system. So let's rejoin the merry trialoguers and see where their discussion leads with a topic that has caused a lot of controversy here in the States in the last 10 years or so. And I'll pick up by playing a couple of minutes from the end of the previous podcast with Ralph Abraham speaking.
I think that some people have suggested, actually, that the public school system be replaced with a voucher system.
This is
an active proposal at the moment.
This is a Thatcherite idea, too. The point is, this voucher system is part of the current political orthodoxy, so it's very easy to see how it might be realized in a new form.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think, a question we have to face is besides the envision of the final product, also some idea as to the path that goes from here, point A, to there, point B. And it's hard to see how to get rid of this entrenched public school system. It would have to be, if we're talking about politics here, there would have to be a plebiscite, where the voters insist on the opportunity to control the school system, and that they want a voucher system.
You simply privatize it, and you privatize the education. You have a voucher system valid at any school, the well-known approved list, which is constituted by a new kind of educational board, not the old one. And the approved list includes Waldorf schools, Montessori schools. It would include Catholic schools, Islamic schools. I mean, there'd be a whole range of accredited schools, including former public schools, which would now become sort of autonomous town schools or something. They'd compete in the open market. And this system would be it'd be pluralistic. It would be extremely responsive to what people actually want and what parents and students are really interested in. And it would have the advantage of being very decentralized and self-regulating.
School as a business.
Yes.
That you're proposing.
Well, right now, school is a business. It's a professional career. The only thing is that it's administered by money taken from us through taxes and administered through a centralized bureaucracy for a bureaucratic organization. Now, school is a business. Both ways we're paying for it. I mean, it's not coming free either way.
Right.
But the way that you can deal with this is that the voucher system are issued by the government to each student by the Ministry of Education. When you're 18, you get a book of vouchers.
Probably medical schools and attorneys and so on would continue more or less as at present. And they would have entrance requirements that there's so many B courses for biology or S courses for science or something like that.
But I think that you see the voucher system, the workshop mode, like you see the other side of this is the reform of the existing professions. Because if you have a group of astronomers, for example, revisioning astronomy, a workshop weekend led by some astronomer plus maybe Terence or you or somebody or me, or an outside person also to be part of the workshop group, maybe Joel to lead in some chanting. And then you go into what's their original vision of astronomy, what is it that interests them most, what could astronomy be again today? Well, one thing it could be is helping to reconnect people with the heavens, designing these henges that we were talking about, setting these things where where Jupiter and things are, so that this goes into every school, and so that children actually learn about the heavens. This would be, then there'd be things where people who are learning astronomy go out at night, have class at night under the stars, and learn the constellations, and have tests in how well they know them. So astronomy related once more to the actual heavens. That would be the new vision in astronomy, which with the direct experience, including maybe communicating with stars and the subject of star spirit, together with all the stuff on radio, pulsing nebulae and quasars and stuff.
Yes.
So, and in each science, Gaia, geology, the new geology, would not only involve studying rocks and knowing about them, but studying them in the context of a sense of the life of Gaia, a Gaian geology that would be in a Gaian perspective, and which would begin and end with right rituals that connect the geological profession to its patroness, Mother Earth.
Well, as the bond issue and the plebiscite are put on the ballot and passed, the students are issued their booklets of 55 vouchers, and the new structure is put in place and simply begins. there still may remain a terrific lack of teachers who would wish to or be able to offer such courses. That the ignorance of the meaning of the ancient sites and the significance of the stars and so on can't be overcome in a day. So chances are in the new forum people would continue teaching exactly what they teach today, and that the workshop of astronomers to revision astronomy and so on would not have a very quick feedback, or maybe any feedback, into the curriculum or the actual conduct of the school, so that while they envisioned a new astronomical profession, that the workshops at all the workshop centers kept on teaching the old one. Somehow there would have to be a miracle to get the whole system onto a new track. And this
wouldn't happen overnight.
The resacralization aspect that we are mostly longing for could never happen, might never happen.
Well, I think
we need to trigger it.
Well, I think that it would have to happen in this new model. You wouldn't just get a booklet of vouchers through the post. To start your path, you'd now be entering the stage of a kind of apprenticeship or learning. There'd be an initiation ceremony, and you could be initiated in any one of a number of ways, through a Christian, Jewish, Muslim. Each religion could run, or if you didn't want to have any of the ones offered by the various religions,
the New World religion would always be a possibility.
There'd be a new world, there'd be a chance for free enterprise in this area, sort of New Age initiations with vague stuff about crystals and
green feminists.
Yes, that kind of thing. There'd be all sorts of... But you'd have to go through one of these initiations, which would be based on initiating you on the path you're going on and calling in blessings on your journey and that kind of thing. Then you get your book of vouchers as part of this ceremony. And this happens at a sacred place of your choice. I mean, you're not forced to go through any one tradition.
So setting up that particular system of initiation rites would be the key step for switching the whole system onto a new path.
Yes.
You'd have to sort of engineer that.
That would be fairly easy, though, because you'd say the importance of initiation for the psychology of children is of vast importance, is now universally recognized. I mean, you can make a strong case that therefore our educational system needs to have a more initiatory quality. We're
talking about the 27 million young Americans who are of the age for this first initiation this coming fall, and how exactly are we going to accommodate this number of people in a new system with the production of 3,000 to 5,000 new teachers?
Well, I'm not thinking... You're thinking about a model of overnight change of the entire American system. I'm thinking of a pioneering experiment in a limited area.
That slowly grows if it deserves to.
The thing is, the way that things happen organically in society, you never convert a system without some prior model of it working. And whenever you try and get any money, persuade anyone, if you can say, look, I've got it going, here it is, you can come and see it. You know, it's vastly more persuasive. And Shorthand does a lot better by being able to say, look, here are the plants, this is the botanic garden, that's it.
Yeah.
Rather than with a bit of paper saying there's this project and, I think there ought to be
something concrete.
Yes.
And so if the workshop system is already up and running as a concrete alternative to the present education, that's its great advantage. It exists. It exists in a pluralistic free market form, which is self-sustaining so far without state subsidy.
Yes.
That people do because they want to do them. And they want to do them because they know that in the workshop they'll, on balance, come out feeling better than when they went in.
So it's not much growing now, but perhaps if people did have vouchers, then it would suddenly start a rapid expansion.
I think it would be a completely new format, because at present no one aged 18 goes to a workshop. It's a system of education entirely for the middle-aged. It's
What's an oversight?
Yes, no, he's on to something.
It's made no contact
How
with
could
the world of people under about 30.
attract an 18-year-old to a workshop? What would be necessary?
You have to talk about psychedelic drugs. I get them. Not quite 18, but 20 to 25.
I think if we did dialogues on morphic resonance and chaos and psychedelics, or trialogues, I think there are a lot of
younger crowd.
Yes, if right now they have to pay $385 or something.
They don't have
to
money.
They don't have the money, they don't have the
People don't have money.
vouchers.
The problem with the workshop system is because it's self-financing, it's expensive to do.
What about Esalen giving, what do you call them, scholarships for young people?
Oh, there's
that
an
would be
idea.
that would be yes. Well, that would be all right. But I think it would be a kind of token thing at Esalen. I think that they maybe have to have some young people's workshops here. That would be it, 2 or 3 a year, where they're offered at a much reduced price.
Yeah.
And that the people who come on them have to be recommended by somebody who's been to Esalen, something like that. So it would create the sense of the Esalen community.
Oh, we have to recommend this to
That's a good
Steve because
idea.
we're really lacking that generation now. It's a serious problem. You know, the Lindisfarne Fellowship, which is just one of these many invisible colleges existing around the globe, I think they're valuable. It's now proposing to dissolve itself on its 20th birthday because there is no coming generation. People are dying of old age and nobody knows a young person to introduce into the circle. So this is a tremendous hole in our bucket.
Exactly. Well, this is exactly where there's a tremendous scope for the initiatory model. You see, the Esalen, coming to Esalen is a kind of initiation for most people. Whenever you come here for the first time, it has an initiatory quality, and most people are the initiates who have an easy familiarity with things like hot tubs and getting food
Wet
in the
towels.
lodge, and that kind of thing. So, if you create, there's one group of initiates, the teenage workshops, the 18 to 20-year-old workshops that happen at Esalen, which are initiations into kind of Gestalt and the kind of things that happen here, and you talking about EMT and me, and so on, which, to get there you have to be recommended by someone who's been here, and therefore there's a much greater sense of initiation into this. Well, the fact is, a lot of teenagers may not know that this world exists, or if they do, have a totally distorted view, but it is an independent, autonomous adult world, and that's exactly what people want to be initiated into. So the sense of a kind of somewhat more mysterious realm of possibility they didn't know about. This is a real thing. There is a whole world that most people don't know about.
I think that's a great idea.
We should end this trialogue and run out immediately and grab Steve and Nancy. Tell them on the Esalen Youth Program.
But you see, things like in schools, like the initiatory things you could do here, like I did on my Rebirth of Nature weekend. One of the things everyone did was the tree ceremony, where you go out to the tree and you ask a tree 4 questions on the north, south, east, west side, the tree oracle.
Yeah.
Well, Jill does this in her workshops, and I found that within 3 hours of talking about, in this kind of context, the reasons for thinking the old worldview was inadequate, the problems of the mechanistic worldview, its temporary nature in relation to resurgent animism, the rising tide of new attitudes, etc., the temporary nature of the mechanistic predominance, and so on, then everybody is happy to go and hold a tree and ask it questions and sit down by it. This tree oracle is very effective, it really works. Now that can be done and is being done with kids, because the Ojai Foundation has now started workshops for school teachers to teach them about the kinds of things you can do, chants, fire circles, vision quests, tree ceremonies. And they're now doing this with various schools, and including bringing them onto the land and doing ceremonies with them there. There's 15 schools now involved. So they've actually already got something going along these lines. And so you see this initiatory quality, so that if you're doing botany, then you learn about tree oracles. That's part of it. You have at the beginning of your course a tree oracle quest at the beginning of each term. And you have vision quests of various kinds built through the system. So I think that the Esalen and places which could be centres for these quests, these initiatory journeys, could fulfill an immediately, and I think the age range they should be doing the initiation is not the key one from 12 to 13. I think that's best done through modified summer camps, specially designed. But this could be the initiation into adulthood at 18 or 21.
So these 55 workshops, they would begin with adulthood. Is that your idea? That the entire elementary and junior and what we call high school, that all that would remain as it is?
Well, I think that the model of trying it out with the initiation at 18 into adulthood, all applicants must be 18 or over. this would be a pioneering thing that we could talk to Steve about. It could happen in 6 months' time right here.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that we're talking about is to change the initiations through summer camps, since none of us are in elementary or primary or middle school education. No, but if you are in that, it's quite easy to do. The people who we were studying,
Yeah.
Master Andreas, their son's at a very open school, and I said, why not get... He did the tree ceremony here, he really liked it. Why not? She used to teach there. Why not do it there in the school? They do a vision quest of these, tree ceremony. They'll do it.
Now, the 55 vouchers and the workshops, how long are they? Are these weekend workshops, week-long workshop, or
well,
5
this depends,
week-long mini courses, or?
Well, I mean, these are all details that one would work out. But obviously, there'd need to be a whole new breed of workshop-type leaders. So another thing is that Esselin, Hollyhock, Omega, and so on would take on a new role. As you'd have workshops for workshop leaders, where you'd actually train people how to do workshops. You'd initiate them into being workshop leaders, and where better to initiate them than in a workshop here. So you'd have these, and then instead of these so many thousand people come to Esselin, if a few hundred of those that came to Esselin every year were initiated into being workshop leaders, and they were each doing workshops, this system could very rapidly propagate.
Yes, very rapidly.
In a self-initiating, self-propagating mode. And there'd have to be some attention given to the initiatory structure of each type of workshop. To start with a dedication or an acknowledgement of the spirit of the place and the powers that in the light of which the workshop's being done. If it's being done in the light of a spirit or of reason or of emotion or of holism or integration or whatever. I mean, what's the guiding principle? An initial ceremony and a closing ceremony and some kind of opening dedication chant or... I mean, this is a pattern of most workshops anyway. And so initiating people into workshop leading would very easily, very naturally be modified, I think. And I don't think even one would have to write the program for it. I think that people would work it out themselves in the workshop format.
Somehow standards would be maintained for workshops, at least at the most famous workshop centers.
Yes,
there would
and
be
then
some monitoring. It wouldn't be only the popularity of a certain workshop which guaranteed its continued existence. It would have to, for example, we wouldn't want to continue some workshop that only taught that the body is the body.
Well, presumably the feedback, the automatic free market feedback mechanisms would regulate this, because if somebody...
No, because corruption is a known mechanism for the downward spiral of society. And that worse and worse workshops become more and more popular because they give the valuation, the value, the accreditation, the coupon, the initiation, without your actually doing anything other than sitting in the hot bath and repeating 3 times the event is the event, or the body is the body.
Well, what you're implying is what you sought to avoid, which is that there has to be a second entity which tests the workshop graduate to see whether...
I want to avoid that. Well, it could be intrinsic in that industries would not employ somebody just from having graduated, that is to say, spent 55 vouchers. They would insist on the courses from some of their favorite teachers or institutions, as obviously a bachelor's degree from Stanford is worth more than a bachelor's degree from Great Western.
Well, a corporation could post a list of courses that would enhance your likelihood of being hired by them. And then you could choose for yourself whether or not to include those in your, as you formed your curriculum.
So this is the self-organizational model.
It's highly self-organizational. I think it's quite good.
I think it sounds doable also.
Airy-fairy quality of most of these schemes.
Well, we'd have to persuade, industries would have to suddenly start opening their doors to graduates of the new system. And this, of course, was a great inhibition for students choosing UC Santa Cruz, although they did, because it was considered a great experiment in its early days, 20 years ago.
Well, you would have to go to people like Lawrence Rockefeller and Andrew Mellon and people like that to get a group of corporations to commit to accepting and hiring
on the alternative.
Yes, who are the great railroad magnates of today who have not yet endowed a university?
Well, you could go to Apple Computer and
For
go
example.
to them, or you
IBM,
could go to, some of these hip haberdashers, Esprit and so forth. Well, listen, these are big corporations.
Yes.
Well, you could start it actually with just a system, a voluntary system right now. You could offer these scholarships where you have to be recommended by an alumnus of one of the existing, Omega or Epsilon or something. And you get these scholarships for, say, 5 workshop vouchers, valid over a 6-month period or something. And with a beginning ceremony and an ending ceremony for the whole thing, as this kind of initiation into adult. This could be started right away. And, they could do them in their vacations or in their summer vacation. It could fit in even with a standard student life pattern. But there'd be then this category of people who'd had a different kind of initiation, and each of them, when they went back to their college or university, people would be curious about what they'd done, and whatever it is they'd done, whatever they said they did, would be quite intriguing to a lot of people.
So the New World System would actually begin with its educational program, and the New World System educational program would have to have a pilot project, which I guess would be the New Village school system.
The Hawaiian Islands.
And then we would have to seek a way to actually begin this pilot project with, I guess it would take one leader, one workshop leader, one ritualist who would make the arrangements for this first initiation, the class of 92, I guess. And then there would be a few people coming of age, maybe children of people we know or something, who would enthusiastically volunteer to be the first, entrance of the class of 92. And then if successful in design, this attractor would then grow. Where we have to begin, probably it would be here at Esalen, because we're here dreaming this up for some reason.
Yes, I think it would be called what would it be called? The personal, the growth, no, something like, there'd have to be some kind of certificate you get from this 5-workshop course and beginning and end thing through places like Esalen.
Initiative education.
Initiative education, or initiative educational. Initiate. You'd be an initiative initiate, and an II for short. And this, when you're applying for a job with the New York Times or with, a bank or something like that, you'd have your degrees, and you'd say, I'm also initiative initiate. And they'd get to know that people who'd done this kind of thing, if indeed it did do them any good, were much cooler, much better, much more together, much more aware of group dynamics,
Sort of like
more
Kelly girls.
And so this would then become something that would be highly attractive to a lot of employers. It would be detractive to others of the more conventional kind, but the kind of people who've been through this course wouldn't want those jobs anyway.
Might be possible.
All the corporate people who pass through a place like Esalen would feel a subtle pressure to convert their hiring practices to recognize.
And to send their children.
And to send
want
their children and to
share.
hire these kinds of people into their organization.
And there'd be the feeling of a real kind of group, or because there is this initiatory quality, a feeling far actually more effective than the usual bonds from college alumnus graduation festivals. I mean, it's much more true.
Some colleges could be persuaded to offer transfer credit for a set of 5 workshops in this program.
Yes.
So 5 workshops would count as one course. It adds up about right. And it'd be like an extension course, or transfer of credit from a course taken in another university.
That's right, and that would mean that students from the more liberal-minded, experimental liberal arts colleges and that kind of thing could give students these vouchers, and they could actually have the freedom of
in the course of 5 weeks
Canadian
of the summer.
Yes,
they could take workshops in 5 different workshop
Omega,
centers or just
Hollyhock,
one,
Esalen,
and get a college credit for it.
Yes.
I think you should be made Minister of Education.
Of the New World Order.
The New World Order.
The NWO. Yes, well, it's a devious way of achieving the resacralization of the world. assuming always, of course, that corruption doesn't somehow annihilate the system as soon as it started. But I think centering it in a place like this, which has inertia, a track record, a good habit, as it were, would give a good chance for success.
I think so. I think a lot of... I mean, if I had the chance of spending a weekend hanging around with my pimply teenage friends at home, or coming to Esalen and doing something that was a threshold of an entirely new world.
Meeting some pimply teenagers from far away.
Right.
So I went to a summer camp when I was...
of both sexes.
Yeah, from age 9 to 13 or something, I went to a summer camp for musical prodigies. And no one went there unless they were interested in music. And anybody who was really interested in music went to this particular camp. It was a great escape from a small town in Vermont, because I went there were a lot of kids from Philadelphia and New York and Miami and so on. And they were very exciting. And mostly we played music together. But such things, specialized camps to learn ballet, sports and so on, they exist. And some of them have track record. They have terrific reputation compared to other ones for the quality of the faculty, also the quality of the students. And such summer, particularly the summer youth program at Esalen, would give it a huge additional scope. And training workshop leaders would give them a bigger choice of workshop leaders in the future, so then they would be creating expansion of their own system, as they don't do now. They have to depend on serendipity to find new workshop leaders.
And as the popularity of workshop-type education grew in schools, as people in 16, 17, 18 got into an age group where some of their friends had been on workshops and had come back, obviously changed in some way, and talking about this thing, a kind of secret to which they were not yet privy. The only way they could have this experience was to go on one of these workshops and be part of such a group. They'd really want to do it, and a huge new market would open up in the sort of high school age.
Yes.
We have to get this tape to Steve immediately. With our bill.
Well, they may not want to expand Esalen, but if Esalen wanted to expand as a business and take on a whole
well, they're
national
very interested
dimension
in all these strategies, and because it's a revolutionary educational concept, it's not simply a strategy for expanding revenue. It's actually a seminal kind of thing. If it took hold, and it seems very sound, because the old method is breaking down. I mean, there is either some substitute off in the future, or we're just looking at a generation in anarchy, largely, in American education.
Well, this does seem immediately feasible. This really could swing into action next year, next summer.
And it could attract capital, endowments from people who see the value of extending our successful adult educational system downward. And nobody seems to have thought of this. There aren't any summer camps along these lines. There are traditional summer camps which are excellent for everything, for tennis, for organists, and so on, but not for the New World Order.
But most of what goes on here could be extended down. I mean, shamanic rattling, chants before sessions in groups, vision quest, shamanic type, all this stuff is instantly adaptable. In fact, probably chanting, chilled out.
So the Ojai Foundation has apparently had a similar fantasy, as they declared 2 or 3 years ago that they were going into general education.
I think that this is something that they're doing, and I heard about this when we were at Hollyhock, but I've never seen it in action. Somebody talked about it. John Bloomfield talked about it.
About a voucher system?
No, about Ojai training school teachers. Who then the teachers can bring some of the groups to the land, and they do vision quests, they do tree ceremonies, they do medicine wheel circles, sweat lodges, all this kind of thing. And I suppose there are private schools that are participating, but the kids love it. It's an incredibly successful program.
Formerly they had to go to Berlin to be able to do this. But now they can do this right here in the Native American heartland.
So I think that there's plenty of scope for starting straight away. And
yes, and for competing in systems and different versions, varieties, different flavors of the idea could be instituted in different locations, because there's an infinite market, essentially. And right now, people under 25 are totally insulated from this.
when I give talks in Germany, in England, here in America, in the kinds of places I'm usually invited to give them, or conferences, the age range is from 35 to 50.
Exactly.
When I'm invited to give talks in universities, which in many ways I prefer, not because I like the structure, there's the kind of hierarchical structure of the professor, the lecture theatre, and all that kind of thing. But the face is full of bright, eager eyes,
Yes.
18, 17, 19, 20.
It's very nice.
Yes.
It's a totally different experience. And when I gave my lecture at the University of Bern, on my German Swiss tour, the only university one I did on the trip, was much the best. There were 250 people in the Botany Institute. I was introduced by the man who invited me, who's a visionary, holistic botanist who really likes the idea of morphic resonance in understanding the evolution of plant form. Quite enthusiastic. But all the professors from different faculties, students and so on, the whole thing in English, no translation. And the atmosphere was absolutely electric. I mean, these kids had never heard this kind of view. I mean, it was totally new. They're normally insulated completely from ideas we take for granted. And they were extremely interested, very excited. Everyone was excited, positive, enthusiastic. It was a really wonderful event.
Well, my courses in history of mathematics in Santa Cruz have a very enthusiastic audience. And my feeling is that this is sort of the radical fringe of the student population in Santa Cruz. So there's 10,000 students. I get 50, 60, or 70 of them once a year. But these people are very responsive, and they love the Hermetic arts, magic, astrology, alchemy, and so on. They're seriously excited. They're really turned on by it, and they do great research and study, and they know a lot already because they've been studying in the closet. And this is their first opportunity to come out and see that other people are also interested in this and connect up and have fun and be able to do it together.
So what we do is introduce this parallel system which operates alongside the existing system, but it becomes so powerful an attractor as it impacts on schools as 6, 17, 18-year-olds go to the Esalen and other summer programs, and they go back and tell their friends, school was nothing like this. And
it's really fun. So I think this is really our best and most revolutionary
everyone will want
idea.
to do it.
I think it's a good idea.
And it'll spread enormously fast, I think, if it becomes something that slightly older people do. That
see the possibility of the CIA instituting some negative publicity action on us, such as older teacher, younger student taking drugs, communing with tree, or some kind of thing. Such as they're very paranoid about this kind of negative publicity here ruining, and for this reason they may not want anybody age 16 or less hanging around because of the danger of scandal.
Make it 18 to 23.
For a start.
I think make it 18 to 23 for a start. And then the parallel for the sort of 11 to 13, this kind of puberty initiation, the parallel, which is often associated with transferring to a different grade of school, or being in a middle school or whatever, that whole thing is ceremonialized, or at least puberty rites through vision camps. But the people who best handle that are the people who run kids' summers camps, with many of which do have another dimension and get back to nature, that kind of thing.
Yes, and they have their watchdog mechanisms in place.
And they have campfires and so on. I mean, people from that world come to a workshop at Esalen where there's an exploration of new revisioning education.
Yeah.
And the two are discussed together, and they go back and work out models that work there. Meanwhile, this new one works out here. We can handle, the people at Esalen can handle in general this age group, I think.
Yes.
18 to
I think so.
Yes. We'll start by the revision of higher education, as they call it, 18 to 23. That's the university age bracket.
And this would create such a powerful competing attractor, because the more people know that it's more fun than that system, and the more the possibility of doing it through or within the traditional system by vouchers or going out and getting credits, the more and more people will want to do it.
Yes.
And I think that it would then, the traditional system's faults have become more and more apparent, because more and more people within it would have had another take on what education could be like.
Yeah.
And I think that morale would rapidly crumble and be faced with, since they'd already got it, by reform they could introduce more of this kind of thing.
Teachers would be rushing to take courses in the new methods.
Yes, the new methods.
So that they could compete successfully with their neighboring teachers for students. Who wants to have an empty homeroom?
That's right. No, this is free market economics working in yet another area.
Yes.
Because right now, education is one of the areas that's been insulated from free market economics by being a state monopoly run by a bureaucratic institution and operated by an old-style hierarchical priesthood with higher universities at the top and higher degrees at the top, and all teachers in regular schools in awe of all these people with higher degrees because they're lower officially, they're like deacons, and there are bishops out there, and archbishops and cardinals and so on. So it would dismantle, it's one of the last bastions of the old hierarchical order.
Now, I may be living in dreamland, but I think the ideas they talked about at the beginning of today's trialogue about setting up a network of workshops that young people could attend for free is a really good idea. In fact, just last year, Sobi and I were trying to generate interest in a similar project where there would be a series of raves held beginning in, say, in Vancouver and gradually heading south until they reached L.A. or San Diego. And preceding each party, there'd be a series of workshops where we'd get some of the local elders to come out and exchange ideas and lessons learned with the generations who are now beginning to take over. But we never quite got enough momentum going to get that little project off the ground. However, I still think it's a good idea in some form or other. I know there are really a lot of psychedelic elders out there in almost every community who would be willing to participate, and in fact there are already a few places where this type of underground university is taking place. Besides the Oracle gatherings in the Seattle area, I've heard of events like this that combine a party with some lectures or workshops that are taking place in all the way from Vancouver down to Portland. And I've participated in things like Cinnamon Twist's learning parties in L.A., as well as the underground university programs at the Blue Bongo, among others. So it's an idea that seems to have taken hold, and maybe now is a good time to try and expand the concept so that we can reach even more people. Maybe we can do some of it online, which would significantly reduce the costs involved and allow students and other cash-poor people like me to become more involved without having to incur the travel and other expenses that usually go along with the workshop model. Of course, the suggestions for a new education system based on workshops that the trialoguers made came over 15 years ago, and not a whole lot has really happened on this front during all that time, at least in the way of free ones. And as my dear mother said shortly before she died a few years ago, everything is different, but nothing has changed. And, maybe now is the hour to begin making some of these changes, So if you have any ideas on how to get something like this started, please pass them along, either in an email that I can read in a podcast or on the notes from the Psychedelic Salon blog, which you can participate in if you want. I had to laugh with when Rupert said that a lot of teenagers may not even know, or it might have been Ralph, can't remember which one, said a lot of them may not even know that the worldwide psychedelic community even existed, or if they did know it, that they had a totally distorted view of it. And the reason I had to laugh is that it isn't just teenagers who don't know about this huge community. As I've mentioned in past podcasts, I was over 40 years old before I stumbled into the tribe, as I like to call it. As hard as it is for me to believe now, I had no idea that there were millions of highly educated and very successful psychedelic people out there. And even if I had known that there were so many people around the world who used cannabis and the psychedelics on a regular basis, I'm sure that my view of what they were like would have been completely distorted. Here is what you really need to know about the psychedelic community. We're everywhere. I want to read something here that Dr. German, he's Professor Emeritus of the Criminal Justice School at Long Beach State University, and here's what he had to say. If the ears of all the people in the nation who had ingested illicit substances in the past 6 months were to turn bright green for one whole week, the nation would be amazed, confused, astounded, and quickly taught something very important, as they identified friends, relatives, neighbors, doctors, lawyers, accountants, priests, nuns, ministers, rabbis, soldiers, policemen, firemen, military personnel, businessmen, teachers, students, politicians, respected policymakers, administrators, supervisors, and workers from a variety of private and government institutions everywhere. And, by the way, Dr. German was the founder of the graduate school that trains many of the L.A. Police Department, among others. So he knows what's going on at a street level, and having met with him myself, my guess is that he just might have green ears, too. So maybe that's what we should all do next Halloween. You know, our only costume should be to paint our ears green. I'm not sure what we would tell people who asked what the point of painting our ears green was, but for those who knew what it meant, it might be a way to make a whole new range of contacts with our community. Maybe we should try it first on St. Patrick's Day, and most people probably wouldn't think much about why we were doing it. Or maybe I'd better get on with today's program and leave the realm of new ideas to you. Actually, one idea that came in a recent email from John, who said, among other things, listening to your back catalog kept me going through a dull software contract and has really changed my views about a lot of things. And then he went on to ask if I've ever been to Amsterdam. Well, John, just as you suspected, yeah, I've been there a few times, and I guess my most memorable trip there was for the 11th Annual Cannabis Cup, which I think was way back in 1998. And I know that event is still going strong, but it doesn't take place until next November. So if you're looking to get together in Amsterdam with a group of like-minded people before then, you might want to consider the very first dope stock, which is going to take place, I think, on April 20th this year, that my friends over at the Cannabis Podcast Network are putting together. And you can get the details about that on their website, which is at www.dopefiend.co.uk. And there are links and feeds to several other podcasts there that I think you're going to find quite interesting and definitely entertaining. John also said, have you thought about accepting donations for your work? This is how the Dope Fiend pays for his bandwidth. Seems to work. Well, yes, I have been thinking about it, but, I know you've got a lot of options on how to spend your time, and so I don't really want to waste it by sounding like a preacher begging for money all the time. But that said, I do want to take a moment here to thank two of our fellow saloners who went way out of their way and searched through the Matrix Masters website to find the page where I'd kind of hidden a little PayPal donation button. So Jason and William, who I think actually is better known as Bill, I want you to know that I was really touched to find your donations waiting for me when I returned from my recent trip. Your generosity really means a lot to me, and particularly since you both live outside of the U.S. Interestingly, your financial help came the same day as I received a notice from my web hosting company that the large number of downloads of these podcasts was causing them to throttle back access to the site at various times during the day, and that they wanted me to upgrade to my own server. Well, the cost of doing that is still too high for me right now, so I've come up with another plan, and thanks to the financial help some of you have been providing, I've opened a companion site with another hosting company, and they've promised to work with us as these podcasts continue to grow in popularity. In fact, this podcast is the first one I've uploaded to this new server, and I hope that you didn't have any issues downloading it. If you did, please let me know, because over the next few months I'm going to migrate all of the old podcast files to this new server, and in the process I'm going to do a little cleanup on the file tags so that these programs will be a little easier to find and to manage in your MP3 players. As those of you who have been with us for a while already know, I've gone through a number of different iterations and file naming conventions, but I think I've finally come up with a way that'll make life a little easier for you no matter what brand of MP3 player you decide to use. So I'll tell you more about the changes to our website in the next couple of podcasts, but I think I've probably gone on long enough for today. But before I go, I also want to mention that Jeffrey just wrote to let me know that he mentioned mentioned the Psychedelic Salon in his blog on the IONS website, which reminded me that I wanted to let you know that I'm also shifting the program notes to our new server, and I'm posting them on the WordPress-powered blog that you can participate in if you want. And by participate, I don't mean just adding comments to my posts, but you can post items yourself. It does require that you register, but that's only to keep the spammers from taking it over. So if you're interested, you can find the blog from a link on the home page at matrixmasters.com, and eventually you'll be able to click a link under each post to dig it if you want, and I've already got the code working for you to bookmark individual posts to Delicious. Also, I've got a long way to go before the new site is finished, but with the help from Joseph, Robert, and a few others who have volunteered to help, I think we're eventually going to have a really interesting place to meet online. Which finally brings me to the last point I wanted to make, and that is that if you want to help us build the Psychedelic Salon community, there are things that you can do that don't require making a financial donation, which I realize isn't possible for many of you. And what would be the biggest help right now would be for some of you to go back through some of the older programs, the ones before program number 58, when I started posting the more detailed program notes, and to compile some program notes for them that I could put on the new blog. You know, I think it'd be a great service to our whole community if you did that, and all I'm really looking for is to get the time into the program and then the quote and who's saying it, and it's just in the format I've been doing here lately. And I think it's really is important to get some of these out there, because the search engines will pick them up, and it'll definitely help attract more people to the Psychedelic Salon. So any help like that and any other ways you can help to spread the word about these podcasts will be most appreciated. Well, before I go, I should mention that this and all of the podcasts from the Psychedelic Salon are protected under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 2.5 license. And if you have any questions about that, you can click on the link at the bottom of the Psychedelic Salon webpage, which you can find at matrixmasters.com/podcasts. If you still have questions, you can send them to me at it's lorenzo@matrixmasters.com. And thanks again to Ralph Abraham and Bruce Damer for preserving and digitizing these wonderful trialogues. And, of course, thanks again to Shetel Hayuk for letting us use your music here in the salon. And for now, this is Lorenzo, signing off from Cyberdelic Space. Be well, my friends.